Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you're all keeping well. I'm delighted to welcome back Thierry Moschetti from the Resilience Institute. Thierry has been a great partner to us over the last 18 months, particularly in light of the pandemic, and I think we can all say that resilience has been a key feature for us all. I think Thierry captures on his LinkedIn page a statement really well. A resilient organization is calm, energized, engaged, focused, and purposeful. Leaders and people cultivate health, joy, and productivity. This attracts, retains, and motivates all stakeholders. So the session today will focus on leading with resilience in the new reality. We've listened to a lot of our HR community over the last couple of months, and we know there's some anxiety around the return to the office, a shift in working patterns to a new, perhaps hybrid model. And I think today Thierry's going to share some practical tips with us all on how we can equip ourselves to perhaps lead with authenticity, trust, and impact. So Thierry, thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kirstine. Very much a pleasure for me to be here with you today again. For the one who joined us after the couple of sessions I run, I guess last year. Yes, I think it was last year, if I'm right, if I remember well. Maybe a few words about the Resilience Institute itself, because for the one who never heard about us, as I sound very French, the Institute is not from France, but from New Zealand, actually. It's interesting to say that our history started in Auckland with a sports medicine doctor who actually started up working with top athletes in the 90s, so a long time ago, more than 30 years ago. And actually in the late 90s, he was horrified to see the pace of work in organizations. And he had that kind of intuition earlier on in the 90s to really actually bring those practices he had developed in the world of sport to organizations. So since 2002, we've been working as an institute with large organizations around the world, working with their teams, their leaders, to really help them thrive in time of change. So, well, change, disruption is what we face today, clearly. I mean, there's a lot of disruption. It's not going to end with the end of the COVID-19, if it's ever actually ends. But the fact that we know there's a lot of different disruptions to come. If you think about climate change, cyber attacks, which really start striking quite a number of organizations now. So many things, enough to justify the importance of resilience in our life, in our teams, and also as a leader working with our team. Now, let's agree and let's first define what we mean by resilience, because it has become a buzzword for sure. It's on every lip in the past few months, past few years. But let's first agree on the definition of resilience. And luckily, science can help us a lot. There's a lot of studies, a lot of academic papers, books, which were published over the past 20 years, 15 years, plenty from neuroscience, obviously, and psychology, and also biology and sports medicine and military fields. And if we simplify things, well, we can look in resilience through four key set of skills, and they're all learnable. That's a very important point to realize that though we may not start at the same level early in life, you can blame genetics and early childhood environment, but the fact is, well, life is not so fair, and we start at different level. But what is crystal clear is that we can all learn to develop those abilities of resilience. And well, the first key ability is this capacity to bounce back. So you face a difficult situation, can be a traumatic experience, of course, or it can be simply those difficult conversations in our day. And that's when you fall into a negative state. So bounce is that capacity as quickly as possible. It can take some time depending on situations, obviously, to get back to the ground level. Now that's one side of resilience, but it's not the only side. Clearly beyond, well, going through adversities, we can take preventive action. We can actually develop ourselves and grow those different skills we all have deep inside ourselves. It's a lifelong journey, development. And clearly, well, it's an important one for you as a leader to be able to grow your team and the capacity of your team, and to really, well, engage all the strengths of those different people that make the team. The third ability is probably the most important one right now, as well as for you as a leader to really nurture, it's connection. So connection first means connection to ourselves. I mean, the busy pace of our days and of our lives means that, well, we really now take the time to really have, well, reflection about the way we operate in life. It's important to take that time to go inside ourselves and to really understand what we do well, what we may not do so well, and what we may improve, and what we can maybe engage more in our days, in our jobs, in our teams. And obviously connection means connecting well with others. So face-to-face in the old days, much easier going to the office, workplace, but today, still facing a screen, or actually half in the office, the other half away, much more difficult. And you see, connection is easy to do in good days, but when day is under high pressure, it's probably one of the first things we compromise as a leader, as a team. The last piece, which is probably the one people tend not to take into account when we speak about resilience, but honestly, it's probably one of the most important ones too, because that's the spice of life. That's the spice, in your team, the kind of things that stimulate you as a team, make you wake up in the morning and, feel like looking forward to starting that day. It's to find flow. Find flow, meaning having that capacity to really fully exercise your strengths in your job, also in your personal life, to really feel engaged, to be fulfilled by what you do. And much more difficult today, as we can't go everywhere, we can't travel, we can't do things still we would like to do as before. Well, I mean, flow can be probably one aspect in our days, in our life we miss. So to develop well those key abilities of resilience, first step, well, is to make sense of what we made of. And there's nothing new in what I'm going to say here. The fact is we are a mix of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual attributes. Very holistic view of resilience we take. Nothing new if you go into the ancient traditions of the world, especially the east side of the world. But science is very clear that we have to really respect first and then develop toward mastery those different dimensions, different types of intelligences, right? So in a way, as a leader, we have to acknowledge that reality, that, in our team, as a team, which is actually in its own right, a kind of, biological entity, we have to respect and develop those different dimensions too. So I've got three key messages to share with you today. The first is, well, especially after 15 months fighting the crisis, I mean, it's important as a leader to make sure that the base camp, the foundations of resilience in your team is secured and well managed. It's all about really energy, staying energized, and taking the time to recuperate, rejuvenate. There's a lot of fatigue around us, clearly, long days, late days. So something which is important to keep in mind as a leader. Second message, well, connection is essential. It's a critical piece of resilience. And one thing we have to do more deliberately today, easier in the old days, we will clearly connect throughout the day in the corridor, facing the vending machine at lunch. But today, actually still, with many people walking away through a screen, much more difficult, and it has to be more deliberate for you in order to keep that connection and keep that trust within the team. And the last message really is, especially as we still in the kind of hardship of the present with not much certainty about the future and how we're going to go back together and work together and whether the job is going to be the same. And what about education or even holidays short term, to really have that capacity to nurture, cultivate hope and find meaning in what we do as a team. That long-term view of the job, of what the organization is striving to achieve. So I'm going to share very practical strategies today. I mean, you know, and as a French, I can say we often like to make revolutions and try to go for very extreme kind of changes or too complex change, you know, and waiting for complex whatever solutions. I think when we face busy days, when we don't have much time, you know, to take care of ourselves, I think it's important to stay simple and to first think of simple changes, behaviors, practices we can bring into our leadership and in our teams. So it's going to be quite simple. Ask yourself, okay, maybe I know that kind of concept and that practice, but do I really do it in those difficult times? It's really important to keep that capacity to do it, not just to know that practice, all right? Because the gap between knowing and doing is pretty wide right now. So let's start with the first step, which is the foundation of resilience, what we like to call the base camp. And in our framework, you see, it starts with really the capacity to manage master stress, create calm, and maintain physical energy. Things we pretty understand well, but we tend to quickly give in to, you know, urgencies, urgent matters of the day. So let me first ask you a question. I'm going to release the poll. It's about your view of your team as you manage a team or you're part of a team, or think about your organization in its, own right. What do you think? How would you describe, selecting 2 words? All right, could be 1, but up to 2, not too many. How will you describe your team right now in the context of today? Can you pick up 2 words that for you describe the best, well, the way your team operate, the level of energy? What do you think? Take your time and select 2 words. And indeed, as you select 2 words, as Kirsten said in the chat, feel free to ask questions using the Q&A box, and Kirsten will stop me whenever there's a need to answer a question. We'll try to keep some time at the end for Q&A. We just want to keep clearly this session interactive. So we've got 16 so far. Let me wait a few seconds and then I'll share what I have. All right, let's go. So we've got, share. Well, kind of the winner is engaged, which is quite good, to say 50%, but we've got then a spread between overloaded, exhausted, number 2, number 3, and focused, number 4. So it's kind of a spread, and clearly, well, different realities, and probably, you know, there can be a level of engagement, but overload too. So different mix, different realities. But clearly, I mean, you know, that reality is an important one to keep in mind as a leader, to be aware of how your team is traveling in life and in that context of today. So you see, when you look into the way we operate in life, and this is the model we have developed over the past 20 years, the fact is, you've got ups and downs. You've got days when everything, you know, is all the stars are aligned, you feel full of energy, quite connected, engaged, clear intention, focus on what needs to be done. And as a team, really, it's those kind of times where you thrive. And other times when, well, actually, it's a different story because of maybe external conditions, because of internal turmoil. The fact is, there's much more difficult times to manage. And we have to accept that reality, we can't just be at the top all the time. And as a leader, it's especially important to recognize the signs, the cues, the symptoms that tell you that, well, maybe someone in your team, maybe the team itself is actually going through difficult times. And here we're trying to describe the sequence of the 4 signs that really show that resilience is actually going down. Can you describe those complex experiences on one slide? You can't, clearly not, but very often in our modern lives, we tend to really first fail at the cognitive level. You see confusion and disengagement as the starting point of that kind of downward journey. Because first, and key reason of that confusion first is that we tend to overload the mind with just too many things. Like right now, you know, got 25 people listening to me, but well, are you really with me? How many times did you check your smartphone, your mailbox? You know, because you've got such a powerful thinking machine, you feel the right to be in different places at the same time, but you know, one, it doesn't work. You make more mistakes, exhaust your energy much more quickly. And two, it's visible. You know, when you do that, people can see on a video call that you're not with them fully. So that leads to confusion, lack of clarity, and at some point disengagement, cognitive fatigue. Then it's more emotional. So emotional withdrawal is basically when some people in your team, you know, are less present, less engaged, participate less in conversation, or simply don't have that time to speak with others because too many things to do, means that, well, they compromise those times, those chats, you know, times to connect with family or friends or colleagues. Kind of a tendency we all have. The cost is very much in terms of positive energy, because those connections as social creators are quite critical in a team for the team to really thrive. And it's a bit like the fable of the boiling frog. You see, I mean, we get used to those kind of days, times where we stop taking care of ourselves, connecting with others, we're in full agitation throughout the day, back-to-back calls. It just becomes normal. So as a leader, you know, I mean, it may feel good that people are busy and running around and doing things and actually never available, but there's a cost at some point. And the cost is really beyond, obviously, health, well-being, not just physical, but mental well-being, productivity and outcomes and results. And as a team, really, we see the long-term cost of this in many studies. So it's important for you as a leader to recognize those signs, and it's much more difficult facing a screen when you meet your people face to face. And my first practice and advice really is to demonstrate care and support as you notice those signs in your team members. And demonstrating care and support doesn't mean, you know, being a psychologist, a psychiatrist, you're not an expert and you can't replace that, but to at least be present, be aware, and it starts by, well, being with the person, give that precious gift of time and to listen and to show that you understand. Just your presence, your awareness can make quite of a difference. And obviously with the support of, well, HR, expert, maybe your EAP program trying to bring some support further, but your capacity to really be with the person and to, well, listen and try to find the best way for them to get back to a more sustainable level of operation is quite important right now. And respect, you know, care and support also means respecting those personal boundaries of your people. I mean, it's very clear today, as we have still many people working from home, those boundaries between work and personal life becomes quite blurry. Now that myth of the work-life balance, you know, we know it, you can't really have on one side work, on the other side personal life, because actually work is part of your life, right? The problem is, how can you integrate your work into your life in a way which really keeps you engaged and help you really thrive? And it depends on every one of us. If you're a young single person and you have that kind of appetite to succeed and to learn and to be on the job, you know, the day, it will be very different situation and boundaries than if you are a single mom working and with 3 kids. Very different context, very different boundaries. So as the leader, it's really important, and it's good to remember what Robert Frost said, that good fences make good neighbors. So know the non-negotiables, the red lines of your people. It doesn't mean that, you know, you have and you can respect all those different red lines, because in some cases, in some situations, maybe that lunch break, one of your team member is required to take, you know, to do something personal, will not be able to be respected all the time because of global call, whatever. But if you know what kind of activities in the day, in the week, help your team members to thrive, to stay energized, to stay balanced, to just stay engaged, you know, in life and in the job, it's much more easy to respect and to support them. And they're going to be different, obviously, for each one of us. And that image of the bookends is a reminder to really keep in mind that as those bookends, well, keep books together, those activities, those non-negotiable, keep your people, strong and hold them together. I mean, really help them stay energized and productive throughout the day. So know the boundaries, know your own boundaries first, and then try to really, through questioning and, informal conversation, understand the context of each individual person in your team. That's the foundation of resilience. It's not just about that. There's many more to say, but clearly those 2 points can make quite of a difference. Then we move up. And when we speak about connection, well, connection works through emotion. That's really something that helps us to connect emotion. Emotion can be quite a complex topic to understand, to manage. But let me first ask you a question. It's about your team and the team dynamics. So what I would like you to reflect on, thinking about your team, the team in which you operate, we actively seek to understand each other, almost always, often, sometimes, so rarely. What's your view? To reflect, and well, each team is different. Some team are new, others have been working for a long time. We know more and more now. I mean, you've got project team that come together and, then, well, disassemble after 6 months, 1 year, we keep changing. So very different realities for each team. Let's see what we have. Let me share based on what I got so far. Well, good to see majority, 56% say almost always, and 38% often, 6% sometimes. So objective clearly is to lean toward almost always, very clear practice and important reality to build in sports for a sport team or even military field for military squad. So we have to lean towards that capacity to understand each other. Now, question, what help you build that capacity to understand each other, to connect, to really create connection, even through a screen, through those virtual type of work? How do you call actually that critical competency that help doing this in the reality of your team and your days? How would you call that competency? A competency that is really on the rise. In many books, it is given as the core, the key competency to build a new age of disruption in the fourth industrial revolution. You want to share that, the name of that competency in the chat? What do you think is that very important skill that help you to really build connection, understand each other? Any of you? Well known, quite simple, I guess. Thank you, Andrew. Indeed, empathy, that's the one. The key competency, it's a bit like, the key that help you really to shift to the other side. And in an age of disruption where collaborative innovation is the holy grail, clearly that is a competency that you have developed well so far, that can be developed further. There's no limit. But the key really competency that distinguishes us from the machine, AI, technical expertise will be quite well managed by machine, but that piece of empathy and those human competencies where we learn to interact well with others will really make the difference. Now, many people would assume that in a civilized world, it's kind of granted that we are more and more empathic people, actually. But I would question that. I mean, some study may disagree with that view. Actually, that study that was done over a period of 30 years in the US, it's a meta-study. The last, I think the decade 2010, 2020 is going to be released, I think at some point soon. But it shows actually declined among college students. Any surprise? What do you think? Any view on why it's going down? Anyone like to share? And you can do that through the chat. What do you think the reason why it's going down? Any explanation? What's your view? A different reason actually given by the psychologist. Very difficult to really, well, find a link of causality, but there are some guesses about the reason why it's going down. Why do you think it went down? And how do you think it's going to be in the last decade, 2010, 2020, actually? Anyone would like to share some view on this in the chat? Yeah, seems that it's difficult to maybe think about causes, but I can share a few if you want, Eleonore. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, lack of time, so less patience, interest. And why lack of time? Is it because of school, homework, busy days, with many things to do? So that's one side, and the key side given by one of the psychologists behind that study. She speak about the pressure kids have, in terms of school, homework, the pressure they place on themselves, pressure environment placed on themselves to really, perform in school. Quite competitive world, obviously. The fact that you have to be the first to get to the next best class, next best school and university. So in a way, that competition, that level of stress is quite high, push kids into some kind of survival mode. It's about me protecting myself, less about others. That's one side. Yeah, that's one side. And another side of it is actually the same psychologist says that in parallel to that decline of empathy, there's an increase of narcissism. So in that period, there was no smartphone yet, but you had Facebook and all those kind of social media coming up, where it will be about, well, promoting yourself. And so that sense of narcissism really is an enemy of empathy. It's about me, showing up myself, my kind of egocentric view of my world. I guess it's not going to get better with the smartphone, the iPhone, and all those kind of TikTok, Instagram, and things that really, well, tend to bring us, to the world as a kind of rock star. But that kind of digital reality clearly did not help too. The fact is also, one of the reasons they gave was that there's much less play outside, outdoor, more games indoor, facing a screen, video games, probably worse today. And you see, when you play outside, like you play soccer, you need 11 players. If you only have 10, and 11 is one guy you don't like really to be with, but you have to have him on board, otherwise you can't play your game. Well, you'll have to negotiate. It will force you to develop interpersonal skills, empathy. So that's the prime sad, the sad side of modern life is we spend less and less time outdoor, living the real life, hurting ourselves. We're a bit too much between four walls and probably too much protected too. A concept called bubble wrapping by psychologists from the US who said, well, we are also overprotecting our kids, with a modern life sometimes. So that's one study. I'm not saying, it's across the board. I'm just saying, let's be careful to assume and not assume that it's granted. We have to really, especially as a leader, nurture it, cultivate it. And that means, well, walk the talk first. So that really is in point one to develop, because it's at the source, the root of psychological safety. A well-known concept that has been on the rise in many organizations. You probably have read a lot on that concept. It's actually Amy Edmondson, who was the first psychologist to really develop studies around psychological safety, and Google made famous some of the studies too. But the fact is, it's an important concept to develop and to support as a leader. And she says, psychological safety is a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, a sense of confidence that others will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. So in the base teams in Google, I mean, that was one of the key differentiators between the highly effective team and the other one, and raised. It's an important one. How do you create a safe space? If I give you actually a couple of tips, anyone has best practice in terms of creating a safe space in your team? How do you do it? How do you do it in your team, especially for the one who said, well, we understand each other almost always? How do you create that safe space? What do you do? What have you done to make it a safe space? And if you can actually, I'm not sure if people can speak up, but do not hesitate. What will be an advice you will give to a team to have that safe space possible? Kirsten, do not hesitate to share one of your practice at Elliott Scott to do that.
Agatha and Uche are here, so they can absolutely chip in. I think we've really readjusted to a regularity of our communications and meetings. I think every day it's that check-in, and it's starting off with a personal check-in before we even talk about work, and therefore set the agenda for the day. I think personally that's worked really nicely for us.
Yeah, that's a great tip, check-in. I mean, in the old days, we will do that naturally, right? You will be in a meeting room and people will come progressively. So you'll have that chat about how about the kids, what have you done, what do you bring in, whatever. I mean, we'll have that time actually. But today, especially when we go, I mean, the first months, that was probably okay, and people will do that. But as we have gone that kind of, routine rhythm of back-to-back calls for many and not much time, we quite go too fast into transactional conversation and we forget that human side of connection, right? Really important to have that time to check in. It's actually a very nice way to indeed make sure everyone is engaged. One other tip really is to make sure that as a leader, especially, that everyone in the team contribute, especially if it's a very much strategic conversation, to not just let the extroverted, the kind of strong voice in the team to speak up. Often, well, through a Zoom call or a video call, I mean, so often it will be the same people who keep speaking first and actually influence also the rest of the team mindset. But try to really make a point to seek and invite, especially those kind of quieter people, to speak up. And there's different ways to do it. It could be before you ask people to speak up to, well, as I'm trying to do with you, invite them to share their view in the chat, to have everyone showing their view, and then, to make sure it's not just the first one to speak up or the only one to speak up, but then to let everyone share their view in the chat first. So you can then facilitate a conversation with everyone. And we live in that reality today where you've got, well, people away through a screen, people in the meeting room, and we know what happens. The one who sits far away are just listeners, passive listeners, disengaged probably, while the one in the room keep talking together and forgetting about the others outside. So, well, practice like maybe making the one away the facilitator, or starting always with those one away from the meeting room. So we make sure those voice quite far from us, not sitting in the same room, first are the first one to be heard. And it's quite important to make this kind of contribution equal. Let me share with you a study that was done quite a number of years ago by Alex Pentland. And what he did was to use biosensors he placed on shirts of people in different teams in an organization. And actually, what he was trying to do is to really track the dynamic of those conversations, whether it was quite equal and fair in terms of, who will speak or not in the first example, you can see that, well, actually conversation are especially coming from the managers and a few extroverted probably people, and some quite stay silent, while in some other team, much more equal. And he found a correlation between equal contribution and higher performance. All right, so really important to keep that view when you go through an important conversation, to really, as a leader, make sure those quieter people through different ways really contribute, and probably are contributing as much time as the other one.
Thierry, I have a question, sorry,
Yes,
on that.
yeah.
Because during the pandemic, a few candidates actually did share that they had struggled in particular with team meetings and particularly with Zoom because of actually the amount of video time. It almost felt that they were more exposed. Is there any advice on more of the kind of introverted types then, just in terms of, you know, getting that connection or getting them more involved?
You're right. So, I mean, obviously, the point here is not to say for someone who's extremely introverted to say, well, Kirsten, please speak. And there's a group of, you know, ex-people listening, and you place quite some pressure on those people. We have to respect the fact that reality, I mean, that's why you are running plenty of personality tests in your organization, your teams, that you've got the one who prefer to indeed think, reflect, listen to others before they share their view. And often they will share their view not in those team meetings, but, well, one-to-one, you know, over coffee. So we have to respect that reality. But you have different ways to respect, you know, those different personality. I mean, breakout session. You know, when you really bring people into small group, so the more quiet, introverted one have a bit more confidence to start sharing. As I said, chat, you know, instead of speaking, I invite everyone to first write down their view and then trying to, you know, facilitate conversation. It's kind of a warm-up. At the end of the day, it means probably trying to keep also those groups not too big, because the bigger, the less confident will be those people to share. So it really depends on the rate of your team, but we know as the bigger is the team, the less effective will be anyway, the conversation, the meeting itself. You can't really do much if there are too many people around. So, I mean, you know what context, what type of meeting, what kind of tools, you know, tricks to use. It's obviously requiring some preparation indeed. And you may actually invite those people first one-to-one, you know, to share what they think about and how they will be comfortable to maybe share more during the group session. So they get prepared, they can rehearse, they have that kind of time to really go into that mode of sharing. Yeah. Another way to, and that's especially important when you do it facing a screen, when you don't read so well, you know, the kind of non-verbal cues, 60 to 80%, you know, the message is from non-verbal cues. So really important to understand that in that kind of virtual reality, our social system in the brain is really lost in translation. So take the time when someone speaks up and shares something, not to respond quickly, you know, well, my view on this point is basically sharing a statement or even judging what has been said, trying to shift from judgment to instead curiosity. Curiosity is the best friend of empathy. You see, when you're curious, you're a bit like a detective, an investigator. You collect evidence by asking question, open question. You actually really show respect to the other side and actually help the other side to reflect maybe on a different perspective on what he or she just said. In a way, it's much better than to say, well, you know, what you think, like a fight. And in a way, when you do that kind of, you know, opposition to what has been said, you destroy one of the core emotional needs that we have as human beings, is to feel part of a team, to feel actually affiliated. So different questions are possible. You've got plenty of different, you know, open questions. But I mean, just to give some example, I mean, if you don't actually agree with what has been said, you know, but you don't want to really be that confrontational with the person, well, why not asking that question? Either another solution that is not really apparent, or what else do you think is possible? And what if it was actually opposite? What's your view on this perspective? All right. And well, what can we learn from this? If it's something that has been difficult, a mistake that has been made, whatever, but trying to reframe in something which is constructive, positive, and helping the person to feel really part of the team and not blame, judged, or criticize. Any question? All right, let's, keep going and move to the next level of the mind. And you see, we like to separate different levels. I mean, obviously they're all integrated, but today, in time of crisis and uncertainty, for many of our people, and including us as leaders, we can quickly fall into cognitive traps. I mean, it's very easy and quite quick, to see the reality in very different ways, different lenses. I mean, for some, they may fall in that trap of, being over-optimistic about, going back to normal. At the end of the day, they underplay the necessary changes that the team themselves should take in order to adapt to that new reality. We tend to be quite optimistic people in general, there's some kind of bias to say, well, it's okay, it's going to be okay, and we're going to go back to normal. And for others, especially as we are going to ask them to go back to the workplace, to take back the train and to mix up with an army of people where they spent the last months between four walls only with the family members, that can be quite stressful, and it's quite quick for them to fall into the trap of, catastrophization and anxiety and worry about how am I going to cope, how am I going to do. So that reality has to be clearly reflected by the leader. And as a leader, it's important to really understand the best way to communicate in that context. You can see your team as traveling down the river, there has been a lot of white waters through the COVID-19, the recession that came in, the furlough, all those kind of things, the necessary changes that took place. Some people had to leave, others had to come. And you see the team doesn't know really whether down the road, down the river, it's going to be a quiet lake, like back to normal in the old days, or, some kind of more peaceful days and times, normal days, or actually more white water, keep changing. So for you as a leader, really important to develop that capacity to communicate with what we call realistic optimism. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychologist behind that logotherapy, the around meaning, like to call that tragic optimism, which is what? Which is, as a leader, to really be realistic about what we face right now, today, in terms of hardship of the present. To not deny it, to actually really define it, describe it, really, be clear that, clearly there's a lot of things that we have to do. There's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of changes that are going to come. But also be very much optimistic about the fact that we as a team, we can go through that difficult present hardship of the present moment to a better future, and we can really actually get stronger from that experience. This is realistic optimism, because you see, pessimism will not inspire people, and delusional optimism, where you try to just deny the reality of the present and keep, your eyes on the kind of super positive future, we also quickly lose your people. They will not follow you. So that kind of a double capacity to be clear with the reality and also optimistic about your capacity to go through those difficult times is quite crucial for you to keep your communications down. And the reality for many teams, I can see as we train, in many organizations, leadership team and their teams, really we can see a lot of workloads, very high workloads, very much, and you did share that in this in the assessment at the beginning, the fact that people really feel overloaded. Days have been longer, later days also. There was, I think, a few months ago, a study published in The Economist showing that on average we had added 1 or 2 hours more a day of work. The time saved in commuting actually has been partially put into the job, not just into personal life. That's kind of a reality for many of your people. Overload, which bring confusion and quickly disengagement. When there's too much to do, well, at some point you do not much at all. So, well, good to remember that motto for you: less is more. You know, it's really important to have that capacity to simplify things, to really clarify priorities on a regular basis, especially when you notice that some of your people are always busy, agitated, no time to take a break, you know, and always responding quickly to any email late in the night. There will be a cost, and not just, again, a cost of well-being, wellness, but cost of, you know, mistake and clearly ineffective performance and results. So less is more means what? Means, well, it's about not adding up always new projects, but before you add up, trying to remove, kill fast other ones which are not anymore relevant. We know the reality for many is business as usual to manage on top of transformation and reinvention. But you have to make some choice. And we have a bias as human beings, the bias of always adding up and not removing. I think there's one study where they use Legos. There was a shape built of Legos, and they had people to try to change the shape from the current one to another one. I think 90% of people try desperately to make the other shape by adding up new Legos, while the best, easiest, fastest way was just to remove a few pieces to reach that shape. That bias is really well ingrained in us, and we have to really take that time, and especially you as a leader, to scan, to map those different projects, different things in the team, and have the capacity to well remove and clarify really to your people what should be the first one thing maybe they should accomplish today, that week, that month, so they can really be clear and driven in what needs to be done. And another way, obviously, as well, is to say no. Say no to yourself, say no to others. We tend to take too much. You know, many people are quite driven and very have high expectation of themselves. They try to take too many things at the same time at a cost. So let's remember what Warren Buffett said. And I think Steve Jobs did the same kind of, had the same thought about saying no. He said the difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful one say no to almost everything. Steve Jobs said the same about innovation. Easy to say, not easy to do. I know you've got politics in place where you can't say no to everyone, but first start by saying no to yourself. All right, it's first step. First thing you control is yourself. Try not to have too high expectation of your capacity in a day, because otherwise, well, there will be a cost to pay. Then, well, the last piece, and not the least, it's all about the why, you know, and probably for you as a leader, there's some kind of duty here to keep that spirit, that, you know, big purpose of why you here as a team. So important, especially when the present is actually a difficult time to go through. Probably too, as after 15 months of going through those crisis time, it's good to stop as a team and maybe invite the team through some kind of, you know, conversation, ideally face-to-face, but even, you know, through the screen if it's the only way, to take the time to scan, you know, different things you've done together. I mean, the challenges, the difficulties, the success you have accomplished, but to try to really create that kind of storyline of your team, to really have that capacity to create that, what we call the team growth narrative. That's one way to ensure that, you know, you get stronger, you learn from what you went through. As you share what you've done well, what you struggled with, the suffering of those different months you went through as a team, as individuals, you make sense of that journey, of those challenges. You, well, feel grateful about what you've done together, or as individuals, what you achieved together. It's a necessary step to really heal, learn, assimilate, and come back stronger. And obviously, well, what will help too is with that storyline to be clear and to link, what you do day to day, the decision, and put the toughest decision you have to make with the purpose of your organization. But that purpose really is the kind of positive force, the engine that push people really and help them go through difficult present, because they know actually what they do is meaningful. There's some kind of purpose behind, even if it's a difficult decision to make, difficult change to put in place. They understand the reason why we do it, because on the long term it will bring some value to the team and to the organization and for the society too. So really it's important picture to keep in your day-to-day conversation, in your strategic conversation, to really keep connecting what you do to that purpose, which is really an important force of positivity. All right, so I mean, different practices, some may take some time, others may be easier. They're quite simple to understand. I would advise you to maybe pick up 1, 2 maximum, and choose the one that you think in the context of your team as HR leaders could make a difference. And each of you have a different reality. So what will be the one you like to try, the 1 or 2? If you want to share in the chat, it would be nice to see actually what could be, what are the practices that resonate well with you today.
There is also a question, Thierry, so when you're ready, I can share that. Yeah,
we can do that as people share in the chat. Very
okay,
nice.
Uma, thank you. So Uma's question, is there any research emerging around the impact of lockdown/restrictions and the long-term impact that this could have on individuals' mental health and well-being? This could be a ticking time bomb, and we need to be proactive in how we manage this.
It's a good question. I mean, it's very difficult. I think it's still quite early stage, I guess, for us. At least, we have developed, and actually have a slide on this one, but we use actually in our program an assessment, which is called the Resilience Diagnostic. We've been using it for quite some time, around 8 years over the 5 continents, and we're actually collecting a lot of data in that period of the COVID-19, and it's still very early stage to say, whether what factors went down, what factors went up. It's not kind of simplistic, simple response. So we're quite careful before we share the comparison. But clearly, I mean, there will be more and more studies as we go out of the crisis. At this stage, it's a bit difficult, I think. What we know is clearly we see more fatigue, we see more, worries about, especially the next phase, going back to work. And we see also probably a lot of frustration, from people who don't see the end of the tunnel, actually. I actually like very much what a psychologist called Adam Grant said about the current emotional state of many people. Let me first release my dog, because my dog is crazy. Sorry. Now I can speak. I had my dog with me in my office. So what he said, actually, he said, you've got the people really fell down and are in depression, in chronic anxiety, really, I mean, suffer from these current times, the fact that they can't connect, they can't see their family, they feel really, trapped or overwhelmed by also the sanitary crisis. And then you've got other people, and you do have some who actually are striving because, well, they're in the right sector, the right job, and for them, working from home and what they do is just making things even more relevant. But in the middle, the biggest bulk is actually made of people who are in that steady course of languishing. It's kind of it's like there's no more spice. It's very difficult to feel engaged in what we do, because it's a bit like the Groundhog Day. You wake up in the same room, in the same place, doing the same thing. So I guess we have to clearly, see that reality in our teams, and trying to first start by listening and inviting people to share, to really, I mean, share the best practice, what helped them, the struggle, but having that time to communicate, to share, and to be aware of how we feel, because each of us come from different, with different mindset, from different realities, and we have to respect those differences too, right? But Uma, you're right to say that it's clearly not going to be easy times ahead, as there's a lot of changes taking place. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Uma. And Emily has just shared, great tips, particularly likes the team growth narrative and less is more. Agreed, Ems.
Yeah, less is more. That's a nice one. I think we can all apply this much more, Less is more means also emails. Do you have to send so many emails? Can you restrict the number of emails you send, or number of meetings, or number of whatever? I mean, item you want to cover in a meeting? Know that this engagement is pretty high, and people can quickly disengage from any video call, especially when fatigue is high. So I mean, there's no point to have too many things to speak about or too long meetings if people are not listening, and many people are not listening. Facing a screen. Yeah. Any question? Any other one?
Any other questions? Because we are nearly at the time, so it leaves me to wrap up to say a big thank you, Thierry. For me personally, I actually really like the quote, "Curiosity is the best friend of empathy." I've actually not heard that before, and it already really resonates. So thank you for sharing that. If any of you would like to follow up with Thierry, as ever, we're very happy to share contact details. He's certainly helped a few of our HR clients and community. So we'd always love to hear your feedback, and anything else, you'd be interested in hearing from us, please do share it. So thank you, Thierry. And whilst I've got a captive audience, I'm going to very quickly share that the Elliott Scott HR Global Survey has just been released. So if you do have 5 minutes, please do take some time to have a look at that. Some of the themes this year are diversity and inclusion, mental health and wellness, pay. If there have been any sort of real shifts post-pandemic in HR. So your input is really valued. And once we get the results, we'll be sharing that with you all. So look, thanks so much for your time. And let's not forget how much HR have had on their plate, particularly in the last 18 months, and appreciate the impact of human adaptability and agility and compassion. And I really hope today, with what Thierry shared from the leadership perspective, we have come away with some practical tips. So thank you all very much for your time, and see you all again soon. Thanks, Thierry.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kirsten. Stay in touch. Have a great weekend ahead.